By choosing to convince voters that Trump was somehow an accomplice to the DNC hack, the Clinton campaign had set itself a difficult challenge, defining the role of Putin's American partners in crime. After all, the hack did not require the assistance of a Tom Cruise character. No one broke into DNC headquarters, crawled through a ventilator shaft, rappelled from a cable, and slid a disk into a hard driver. The hackers carried out the operation unilaterally, electronically, and probably from offshore. They required no accomplices on American soil. Steele solved this problem by finding sources who revealed that the crucial contributions of Trump's team came in the planning stages. As it turns out, Steele reported, the idea to hack the DNC actually originated from the American side. It was Trump's team that defined the objective of the operation, leaking the DNC emails to WikiLeaks during the Democratic convention in order to swing supporters of Bernie Sanders away from Hillary Clinton and across to Trump. This report solved half of the Clinton campaign's problem. It established Trump's guilt. But a conspiracy can't grab the popular imagination if it is devoid of actual conspirators. Here again, the super spy's sources came to the rescue. On the day-to-day level, the job of managing the Trump-Putin collusion fell to Paul Manafort, who at that time was still Trump's campaign manager. But Manafort was not the architect of the DNC hack. Fortunately, the super spy was running a mole who was able to identify that criminal genius. The plot, Steele reported, was conceived and promoted by Trump's foreign policy advisor, Carter Page. Here, the super spy's vaunted ability to filter out Russian disinformation appears to have failed him. Carter Page, who is no relation to Lisa Page on McCabe's team, played a negligible role in the campaign. The Trump people had placed him on a team of foreign policy advisors, to be sure, but they had thrown the group together in haste to counter the accusation that the campaign lacked an expert bench. Page did not know Donald Trump personally. He worked in finance, with a focus on investing in Russia's energy sector, but he had no notable achievements to his name. A former boss described him, very unkindly, as a gray spot, a man without any special talents or accomplishments. Steele's allegations against Page make sense only in a Marvel Comics universe. Carter Page by day, a mild-mannered businessman by night, a diabolical mastermind. The role that the super spy ascribed to Page may have been absurd, but what choice did he have? The conspiracy needed a face. That person had to have plausible connections to Russia, plus a certain amount of visibility. In Trump's orbit, there were only two candidates, Manafort and Page. Manafort's ties, however, were to Ukraine, not Russia, and he was too well known. He had been working in Washington since the Reagan era. Page, by contrast, had direct connections to Russia, having lived in Moscow for some 3 years. The modesty of his career was actually a plus, because Clinton's propagandists could present it as shadowy rather than unsuccessful. For an unknown, Page was surprisingly visible. His trip to Moscow in July 2016 had received significant press attention, not least because he had expressed opinions in favor of rapprochement with Russia and critical of American foreign policy. With the aid of Fusion GPS, the Clinton campaign rolled out their master narrative on Trump-Putin collusion. A new orthodoxy immediately gripped the establishment press, which amplified the overwrought propaganda, complete with suggestions of dirty deals, dark conspiracies, and blackmail. It was Jeffrey Goldberg, the national correspondent, now editor of The Atlantic, who first trumpeted the new line. In his aptly titled article, "It's Official, Hillary Clinton is Running Against Vladimir Putin," Goldberg alleged that Trump had chosen to unmask himself as a de facto agent of Russian President Vladimir Putin. In Putin's puppet, Franklin Foer of Slate examined the matter from the Russian side. Vladimir Putin has a plan for destroying the West, and that plan looks a lot like Donald Trump, he wrote. David Remnick's article discussing Putin's affinity for grainy sex videos made identical points. All three authors noted with grave concern the Russian ties of Paul Manafort and Carter Page. With the exception of Fox News, the broadcast media beat the same drum. CNN might not have accused Page of masterminding the hack of the DNC, but it recognized a dangerous man when it saw one. On August 8th, for example, it devoted a long segment entirely to Page. What's really remarkable here, Jim Ciuto, CNN's chief national security correspondent, told anchorman Wolf Blitzer, is that Page's positions match almost word for word the positions of the Kremlin. on, for instance, alleged U.S. orchestration of pro-democracy in and around Russia, and that is sparking concern from Russia experts and former policymakers even inside the GOP. So, Page was sparking concern even among never-Trump Republicans? How ominous! But imagine how much more ominous it would have sounded if journalists could have reported that Page was also sparking concern in the FBI. At that moment, John Brennan, the director of the CIA, was doing his damnedest to hand journalists precisely that story. While the establishment press was singing in harmony with the Clinton campaign, a cacophonous debate erupted inside government. At the end of July, James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, said at a public forum that the intelligence community was not ready yet to make a call on attribution. Not ready, that is, to attribute the DNC hack to Putin. Clapper was also unready to say that the intention of the hackers was to get Trump elected. The goal, he said, may simply have been to stir up trouble. When combined with similar comments by other intelligence officials, Clapper's statements undercut Hillary Clinton's effort to brand Trump as Putin's active accomplice. Enter John Brennan. In early August, Brennan launched a personal campaign to force a consensus in support of Clinton's propaganda. Before long, Clapper became his partner in this effort. They would succeed, however, only after the election, and then only by establishing an ad hoc and highly unorthodox intelligence assessment team. To man the team, Brennan and Clapper handpicked a small number of analysts, tasking them with reaching a consensus before the inauguration of Donald Trump. The team, no surprise, did not disappoint. In January 2017, it produced the consensus that Brennan had been trying to orchestrate for previous 5 months. By then, it was still useful as a propaganda tool against President Donald Trump, though it had arrived far too late to help Hillary Clinton win the election. Of course, Brennan has never admitted his political motives. On the contrary, according to an in-depth Washington Post investigation based on interviews with either Brennan himself or people very close to him, the CIA director claimed to be in possession of eye-popping intelligence reports about the DNC hack. These reports supposedly captured Putin's specific instructions on the operation's audacious objectives: defeat or at least damage the Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton, and help her elect her opponent, Donald Trump. Yet even if this intelligence trove actually did exist and truly did convince the CIA director, it obviously did not have the same persuasive impact on his colleagues, as evidenced by Brennan's failure to deliver a consensus assessment of Putin's motives. In his mission to transform the intelligence community into an official choir of the Clinton campaign, Brennan ran up against a 6'7" wall in the form of James Comey. According to the New York Times, in August 2016, a critical split emerged between the CIA and counterparts at the FBI, where a number of senior officials continued to believe that Russia's cyber attacks were aimed primarily at disrupting America's political system and not at getting Mr. Trump elected. As a component of this disagreement, Brennan may also have pressured Comey to investigate possible collusion with Russia by aides and associates of Trump. By law, the CIA cannot spy on Americans. Only the FBI has the authority to investigate citizens. But the CIA can share reports with the FBI about efforts by foreign agents to suborn individual Americans, and it can strongly urge the Bureau to take action of the basis on those leads. Brennan, it would appear, did just that in July 2016. That was the moment when the FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation into Russian efforts to influence the Trump campaign. As we mentioned, Peter Strzok, who had been in charge of mid-year exam, took charge of this investigation too. The genesis and scope of it, however, is shrouded in a fog of deliberate misinformation. From the little we know, the probe seems to have centered on George Papadopoulos, a young foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. Acting mostly on his own initiative, Papadopoulos reached out to Russians in the hopes of brokering a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. In the process, he may have bumped into Russian intelligence agents. Papadopoulos' activities took place primarily in London, a part of the world where the CIA has greater reach than the FBI. How did Comey come to learn of them? The answer is unclear, but certain clues point to Brennan. One of these is Brennan's own testimony before the House Intelligence Committee in March 2017. The CIA, he explained, had shared certain information with the FBI, an apparent reference to the Papadopoulos leads. This was information, he said, that required further investigation by the Bureau to determine whether or not U.S. persons were actively conspiring, colluding with Russian officials. Was Brennan taking responsibility for kickstarting the investigation into the Trump campaign? He seemed to be saying that he had dropped the Papadopoulos file on Comey's desk and said, "Investigate Trump." If this supposition about the origins of the investigation in July is correct, it may also help explain Brennan's behavior in late August, when he grew increasingly exasperated with Comey. In an effort to gain allies, Brennan turned to friends in Congress for help. With the blessing of Obama, he organized a series of briefings for the so-called Gang of Eight, the Democratic and Republican leaders in both chambers of Congress, and the chairs and ranking minority members on the Senate and the House Intelligence Committees. According to the New York Times, Brennan told these senior lawmakers that he had information indicating that Russia was working to help elect Donald J. Trump president, a view that was not supported by an authoritative intelligence assessment. Obama and Brennan explained the briefings as an effort to forge bipartisan unity in the face of the Russian threat. But if Brennan couldn't force a consensus inside the intelligence community, how could he possibly convince Republicans and Democrats to join hands during a polarizing election, no less? This high-minded bipartisanship was simply cover for a highly partisan move. The true motive of the briefings was to ventriloquize the Democrats on the Hill. If Brennan himself had gone public with his claims about Putin, he would have called down attacks on himself for passing off Clinton propaganda as an official intelligence assessment and for meddling as the director of the CIA in domestic politics. Democratic lawmakers who received his briefings, however, operated under no such constraints. They were perfectly free to pass along Brennan's views to the public as their own. They became the ventriloquist dummies, moving their lips mechanically as the CIA director spoke. Brennan placed one of them center stage. On August 25th, he gave a briefing that differed from the others. He tailored its content especially to the bare-knuckle politics of its recipient, Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid. During the 2012 election, Reid had assisted President Obama by falsely claiming that his Republican president challenger, Mitt Romney, had paid no taxes for 10 years. When later asked if spreading a false rumor wasn't reminiscent of McCarthyism, Reid responded, "They can call it whatever they want. Romney didn't win, did he?" With the certain knowledge that Reid, who was in any case retiring after the 2016 election, would do whatever it took to win, Brennan indulged his own partisan political passions. He told Reid, according to the New York Times, that unnamed advisors to Mr. Trump might be working with the Russians to interfere in the election. If Reid's response is anything to go by, Brennan did much more than that. He briefed the senator on information taken directly from Steele's dossier, and he complained about the recalcitrance of the director of the FBI. 2 days after the briefing, Reid wrote a letter to Comey, which he immediately shared with the press, claiming there was mounting evidence of a direct connection between the Russian government and Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Reid demanded that the FBI launch an immediate investigation. "The American people," he wrote, "deserve all the facts before they vote this November." The Trump campaign, Reid continued bluntly, has employed a number of individuals with significant and disturbing ties to Russia and the Kremlin. He was particularly concerned with Trump associates who may have served as what he called complicit intermediaries between the Russian government and hackers. The prospect of individuals tied to Trump, WikiLeaks, and the Russian government coordinating to influence our election raises concerns of the utmost gravity and merits full examination. In an unmistakable reference to Steele's reports on Carter Page, Reid informed Comey that questions have been raised about a Trump advisor who allegedly met with high-ranking sanctioned individuals while in Moscow. Serving as Brennan's dummy, Reid publicized the Marvel Comics rendering of Carter Page, and he demanded that the FBI launch an investigation on the basis of it. Before long, Comey would obey. Shortly after Reid's letter, Obama asked the FBI for an update on its investigation of Russian tampering with the election. The president, Lisa Page, texted to her lover, Peter Strzok, "Wants to know everything we're doing." The text probably refers to Obama's preparations for the G20 meeting in China, where he personally lodged a complaint with Putin about the Russian hacking. But the request is intriguing. Obama was engaging the FBI just as it stood ready to use the allegations of the Steele dossier as a basis for broadening its investigation of Trump. When Comey informed Obama about everything we are doing, did he discuss the Carter Page allegations? Did he note their source, Christopher Steele? And what about the president himself? Did Obama nudge Comey to comply with the demands of Brennan and Reed? Whatever signals the president may have sent, McCabe and his lovebirds certainly began supporting the efforts of Brennan and Reed to paint Trump as Putin's puppet. The form of support was nuanced and clandestine. If Peter Strzok and Lisa Page had contacted their favorite reporter, Devlin Barrett, and leaked the fact that a Trump advisor was coming under investigation, the leak would have implicated the FBI. Trump and his supporters would then have castigated Comey, accusing him of intervening in politics. To avoid such problems, the lovers used a pair of cutouts, intermediaries who laundered the FBI's information in the same way that Reed had laundered information for Brennan. Who better to play this role than the super duo, Simpson and Steele? Either directly or through an intermediary, Strzok shared with Steele the news of the impending investigation of Carter Page. He did so with the certain knowledge that Steele would channel it to Simpson, who in turn would incorporate it into his standard press briefings. FBI representatives would later deny having used Steele as a cutout with the press, but their self-defense, as we shall see below, is demonstrably false. The experience of the journalist Julia Ioffe demonstrates how diligent Simpson was at spreading the news that Strzok was surreptitiously feeding him. In mid-September, Ioffe published a profile on Carter Page for Politico. As I started looking into Page, she relates, I began getting calls from two separate corporate investigators digging into what they claim are all kinds of shady connections Page has to all kinds of shady Russians. One of those investigators was, presumably, Simpson. The other one probably represented another dank corner of the Clinton demimonde. Both emphasized an allegation that came directly from Steele's dossier, namely that Page, during his trip to Moscow in July, had met with Igor Sechin, who is a key Putin ally and the chairman of the Russian state oil company. The corporate investigators, however, now had something else to push, something new and something very newsworthy. The FBI was investigating Page. As knowledge of the FBI's interest in Carter Page spread, Steele's credibility soared. To exploit the opportunity, Simpson flew Steele to the United States to brief select media outlets in person. Thanks to the information that McCabe's team was leaking to the press through Steele, Simpson could repackage the super spy. No longer just a former MI6 operative working as an independent research, Steele was now a trusted colleague of the FBI's. He possessed unique insights into the fears of American counterintelligence officials about Trump's nefarious relations with Putin. For the first time, Steele agreed to go on the record as a quoted source for journalists. This round of briefings generated an article written by veteran Yahoo reporter Michael Isikoff entitled, U.S. Intel Officials Probe Ties Between Trump Advisor and Kremlin. It focused naturally on Carter Page. Isikoff reported that American officials had received intelligence reports that Page had met with Sechin. At their alleged meeting, Isikoff reported Sechin raised the issue of the lifting of sanctions with Page, the Western intelligence source said. A Western intelligence source? That would be Christopher Steele. By identifying the super spy in this manner, Isikoff disguises, wittingly or unwittingly, Steele's identity as a Clinton operative and as the author and disseminator of the reports in question. The moniker had the added benefit of making Steele seem to work for a Western government, creating the illusion of transatlantic trepidation about the cunning Carter Page. Confirmation of the article's central claims came from two other sources. The first was a senior U.S. law enforcement official who told Isikoff that Page's meetings in Moscow were being looked at. Would that be Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, or Lisa Page? The second confirmation came from a congressional source familiar with briefings that lawmakers had received about Carter Page's meetings in Moscow. Would that be Harry Reid? Whether these were indeed the correct identities, it is obvious where Isikoff found his sources, on Glenn Simpson's Rolodex. Here was a story processed and canned in Fusion GPS's information factory. All Isikoff had to do was add water and shake. His sources were all part of a single network conspiring to hoodwink the public. Why did Comey participate in this fraud? Perhaps it was to get Brennan and Reed off his back. On the risk side of the ledger, the dangers were minimal. Today, the Isikoff article is a fingerprint on a hot bullet casing. irrefutable proof placing the FBI at the scene of the crime. But in September 2016, the chances of anyone ever tying the Bureau to it were negligible. Although the article announced with great flourish the opening of an investigation into Carter Page, it's not even clear that, at this point, Page was truly an official target of the probe. The important thing to Brennan and Reed was helping Hillary Clinton win the election. What they desired most from the FBI was a public statement that the Trump team was under investigation for conspiring with Putin. With the Isikoff article, Comey didn't fully satisfy them, but he threw them a bone. On the reward side of the ledger, he showed Hillary Clinton and her friends that he was, despite everything, a team player, and his contribution to the team effort was indeed significant. The FBI's leaks were indispensable in giving Superflack Glenn Simpson a stable of seemingly independent sources willing to go on the record about the grave concern sweeping the Western world about, of all people, Carter Page. Mr. Page is not an advisor and has made no contribution to the campaign, said a Trump spokesman in reaction to the media storm over the Isikoff article. If Carter Page thought this disavowal would return some normalcy to his life, he was sadly mistaken. It actually put a target on his back. So long as he was officially affiliated with the Trump campaign, Comey would no doubt hesitate to seek a surveillance warrant for fear of laying the FBI open to the charge of engaging in politically motivated spying. After the disavowal, Comey had more room for maneuver. He therefore gave the go-ahead to seek a surveillance warrant. Widening the probe to include Page carried a little additional risk for Comey, but not much. If Clinton were to win the election, as everyone expected, then she would never punish him for the move. If Trump were to win and learn about the probe, it would certainly enrage him, but the investigation could also be useful as leverage. Peter Strzok put it well in a text to Lisa Page a month earlier. On August 15, 2016, referring to the possibility of a Trump victory, Strzok wrote, "I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. Strzok presumably was saying that a counterintelligence operation against Trump and his team would give the FBI leadership a species of job insurance, similar to the job insurance that J. Edgar Hoover enjoyed in his day. Presidents dared not fire Hoover because he kept a black book on them all. Strzok's team began the process of seeking a surveillance warrant on Carter Page from the court established by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, known as FISA. The FISA court's proceedings are not public because they treat top-secret intelligence. To seek a warrant against Carter Page required the FBI to show probable cause that he was acting as an agent of Russia. In preparation for the warrant application, the FBI flew Steele to Rome for a face-to-face meeting with his main FBI contact. According to the New York Times, the handler told Steele that the FBI would pay him $50,000 if he could get solid corroboration of his reports. It was an incriminating omission. Steele's reports on Page's Moscow trip were 2 months old. The U.S. government, that is, the FBI and the CIA, hadn't produced an iota of corroboration, and yet on the basis of those stale reports, it had suddenly decided to target Page as a probable agent of a foreign power. Why? Because without the Carter Page who appeared in the Steele dossier, without the Marvel Comics villain, there existed no credible intelligence pointing to a criminal conspiracy between Trump and Putin. If the investigation was to be sufficiently broad to dig up dirt on Trump, it had to include the fanciful allegations against Page. These, however, were impossible to corroborate because they were fictive. They did, however, include one claim that, if shorn of context, wasn't as transparently silly as the others. Namely, that Page had met with Sechin, the chairman of the Russian state oil company. To be sure, Steele's report of the meeting contained the outlandish claim that Page had negotiated with Sechin on lifting American sanctions against Russia. But if McCabe's team were to downplay this aspect as much as possible and focus instead on whether the meeting actually took place, it didn't. Well, that could make it appear like a worrisome allegation calling out for a sober follow-up. The super spy sprang into action. He tapped his daisy chain of paid Russian informants, and before McCabe's team submitted the FISA warrant application, he produced some short reports, supposedly confirming the meeting with Sechin. Steele discovered in his network another source, the friend of one of Sechin's friend, who had heard from Sechin and from Sechin's personal assistant that indeed Sechin had met with Page. Confirmation? The source also reported that Sechin offered Page, in return for Trump lifting of U.S. sanctions on Russia, a personal reward, a 19% stake in the Russian state-owned oil company, a haul worth millions upon millions, or probably billions. No mere criminal mastermind. Page was a master negotiator as well. Cartoonish depictions such as this constitute the primary basis on which the FBI made the case that Page was probably a foreign agent, and that, in addition, he had probably broken American law, the legal standard for issuing surveillance warrants. The application for a warrant against Page is locked behind a top-secret classification, but McCabe testified before the House Intelligence Committee in December 2017 that without Steele's information, the FBI could not have secured a surveillance warrant, and according to Senators Chuck Grassley and Lindsey Graham, who have read the original warrant application and the 3 renewal applications, the bulk of the material on which the FBI made its case against Page came in the Steele dossier. What is more, the application contained, in the words of the 2 senators, no additional information corroborating the dossier allegations, no additional information, that is, except for one newspaper article, the Isikoff piece. McCabe's team supported an application based primarily on Steele's allegations by offering the judges an article that itself was based solely on Steele's reports.